My friend's aunt smiled and said, "How can I repay you?" I should have just said no charge. "Hello, I'm Jake. I'm 26, running my late father's garage. And I've always been the guy who fixes things, cars, problems, never hearts. That Thursday night changed everything. Daniel called panicking about his Aunt Patricia, stranded on the highway. Just another rescue, I thought. But when I found her reading by phone light beside her Mercedes, completely composed in that business suit, something shifted. She wasn't helpless. She was choosing to let me help. 3 hours later, we sat in her kitchen at 2 a.m., coffee cups between us. 19 years between us. "I trust you with her," she said about the car. But her eyes said more. "I should have left then." I didn't. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I was just pulling down the garage door for the night when my phone buzzed. Thursday evenings were usually quiet, time to catch up on maybe grab a beer before heading home. But Marcus's name lighting up my screen changed everything. "Hey man, what's up?" I balanced the phone while wrestling with the stubborn lock. "James, thank God you picked up." Marcus's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "My Aunt Ellen is stranded on Highway 12. Her Mercedes died on her, and I'm stuck in Seattle at this conference. I've been calling everybody, but no one's available this late." Elena. The name sparked a memory from Marcus's graduation last spring. A woman with warm eyes and an infectious laugh who'd spent 20 minutes asking me about classic car restoration, while other party guests had nodded politely at my mechanic talk. She'd leaned in, genuinely curious about the 1967 Mustang I was bringing back to life. "What's wrong with the car?" I asked, already heading back inside to grab my tools. She said something about smoke from the engine, then it just died. She managed to coast onto the shoulder, but she's been sitting there for almost an hour. Marcus's worry was palpable. "I know you're probably closed, but text me your location." I cut in, gathering what I might need. "I'll head out now." The relief in his voice was immediate. "Seriously? You're a lifesaver." She's about 5 miles past the Miller Creek exit, heading north. After hanging up, I stood in my familiar workspace, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of tools and parts that had been my world since inheriting the garage from my dad. Every day brought its routine: oil changes, tune-ups, the occasional transmission rebuild, safe, predictable. But something about this call felt different. Maybe it was the thought of her alone on that dark stretch of highway. Or maybe it was the memory of how she'd listened so intently at the graduation party, asking thoughtful questions about paint matching and period-correct restoration techniques. Most people's eyes glaze over when I talk shop, but she'd seemed genuinely fascinated. The drive-out was quiet, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I replayed that single meeting in my mind. She'd worn a navy dress, I remembered, and had this way of tilting her head when she was really focused on something. Her questions were specific, detailed, about the challenges of finding original parts, about whether I preferred preservation or modernization. It wasn't just polite small talk. She'd actually cared about the answers. I caught myself smiling at the memory of her delighted laugh when I described having to fabricate a door handle for a rare Italian sports car. "So you're not just a mechanic," she'd said. "You're an artist." The highway was nearly empty at this hour. My tow truck, the only vehicle for miles. I checked Marcus's text again. She should be just ahead. Sure enough, my lights finally caught the shape of a burgundy Mercedes pulled onto the shoulder, its hazards blinking steadily in the night. I couldn't help noticing how the sleek lines of the car looked almost elegant even in distress. Like a dancer pausing mid-performance. As I pulled up behind it, I found myself adjusting my work shirt, brushing off invisible dust. It was just another roadside assistance call, I told myself. Just another Thursday night. But as I reached for my flashlight and tools, I knew I was lying to myself. Something about this rescue felt different. Maybe it was the memory of her genuine interest in my work, or maybe it was just the strange magic of an unexpected encounter on a quiet highway. Either way, my heart beat a little faster as I stepped out in the cool night air. I watched the driver's door open, and a familiar figure emerged, silhouetted against my headlights. James? Elena's voice carried clearly in the still night. I can't believe Marcus actually found someone at this hour. As I approached the Mercedes, I found Elena leaning casually against the driver's side door, her phone casting a soft glow across her face as she read. She looked up at my footsteps, and the smile she gave me was both grateful and composed, the kind that suggested she treated even roadside breakdowns with a certain elegance. James, she said, slipping her phone into her suit jacket pocket. I really appreciate you coming out so late. That smile caught me off guard. My memory of her from Marcus's graduation hadn't done her justice. In her tailored business suit, she projected an air of quiet confidence that made me suddenly conscious of every grease stain on my coveralls. But there was warmth in her eyes, too, a hint of the genuine interest I remembered from our previous conversation. Let me take a look under the hood, I said, trying to focus on the task at hand. When did the trouble start? She moved beside me. As I propped open the hood, close enough that I caught the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the cool night air. About 20 minutes into my drive, she explained. First, there was this unusual ticking sound, then smoke, and finally, it just gave up. The way she said it made it sound like she was describing an old friend having a bad day rather than a mechanical failure. I switched on my flashlight and began examining the engine. Elena stayed close, asking surprisingly technical questions about what I was finding. Her knowledge impressed me. Most clients just wanted to know how much and how long. But she seemed genuinely interested in understanding the problem. See this here? I pointed to a clearly damaged component. Your timing belt's completely shot, and it's caused some serious cascade issues. I moved the light to show her other areas of concern. These are your valve covers. They're leaking. Pretty badly. And this, I traced the beam along a series of connections. You've got multiple vacuum line problems. She leaned in closer to see where I was pointing, and I found myself increasingly aware of her presence, a soft rustle of her silk blouse, the way she tilted her head thoughtfully as I explained each issue. Poor girl, she murmured to the car. She's been so reliable for so long. These are all parts I'll need to order, I explained, straightening up. It's not something I can fix here on the roadside. Elena nodded, accepting the news with remarkable. Grace, what do you suggest? I can tow it back to my garage tonight and get started on ordering parts first thing tomorrow. I hesitated before adding, and I'd be happy to drive you home after we drop off the car. That would be wonderful, she said, and something in her tone made me feel like I'd offered more than just a ride home. Though I hate to keep you out. Even later. It's no trouble, I assured her, moving to get the tow truck ready. As I worked to position it, I could feel her watching me with interest, asking occasional questions about the process that showed she actually wanted to understand what I was doing. When it came time to secure the Mercedes, she helped me with the chains despite her formal attire. Our hands brushed as we passed the chain between us, and I noticed she didn't immediately pull away from the contact. That brief touch, combined with the intimate quiet of the empty highway and the way she stood just slightly closer than necessary, created a moment that felt charged with possibility. The whole situation felt surreal. Here was this sophisticated woman in her expensive suit, helping me chain her luxury car to my tow truck like it was the most natural thing in the world. The night air had cooled considerably, and I could see her trying to suppress a shiver. Almost done, I said, making a final check of the securing points. Just need to make sure everything's tight for the drive back. I found myself speaking more softly than necessary, as if anything too loud might break the strange spell of this unexpected encounter. Elena's heels clicked against the asphalt as she moved to examine my work, and I caught another hint of her. Perfume, something subtle and expensive that made me think of warm skin and candlelight. You're very good at this, she observed. And something about the way she said it made me think she wasn't just talking about the towing. The city stretched, quiet and empty before us as we made our way through the streets, my tow truck's headlights casting long shadows. Elena had settled comfortably into the passenger seat, her presence bringing an unexpected warmth to my usually solitary nighttime drives. So, tell me about running your own garage, she said, turning slightly toward me. Marcus mentioned you? Inherited it from your father? I nodded, checking the mirrors to ensure her Mercedes was still secure behind us. Yeah, took over when I was 23. Dad had a stroke, and suddenly I was in charge of everything. The books, the employees, all of it. That must have been overwhelming, she said softly, and I could hear genuine understanding in her voice. It was, still is, sometimes. I surprised myself with the admission, but you know what keeps me sane? The restoration projects I work on during weekends. Taking something broken and making it whole again, there's something special about that. Elena's eyes lit up. I completely understand. That's how I feel about my Mercedes, actually. It was my father's pride and joy. She glanced back at her car through the rear window. He left it to me when he passed, and it's been with me through everything. My marriage, my divorce, all of it. More reliable than most people in my life, if I'm being honest. I found myself smiling at that. Cars are like that. They become more than just machines if you treat them right. Exactly. Her enthusiasm was infectious. Though I suppose you see plenty of people who don't share that view. Oh, you wouldn't believe some of the customers I get? I chuckled, then launched into a story about a particularly difficult client who insisted duct tape was an acceptable long-term solution for a radiator leak. Elena's laugh was genuine and warm, filling the cab of my truck dot as we talked. I found myself impressed by how quickly she grasped mechanical concepts. When I explained what had likely led to her timing belt failure, she asked informed questions. That showed real understanding. It wasn't the polite nodding I was used to from most clients. You know more about cars than most people who come into my shop, I commented as we turned onto a wider street. Well, growing up with a father who loved cars, you either learn or get left out of the conversation. She smiled. Though I admit, the Mercedes is special. It's been my constant companion for 15 years now. The streetlights played across her face as we drove, and I couldn't help noticing how at ease she seemed despite the late hour and circumstances. The 19 years between us felt both glaringly obvious and strangely irrelevant as our conversation flowed from cars to life philosophies, to favorite driving routes. The neighborhood changed as we drove. Working-class homes giving way to modern houses with manicured lawns. When we pulled up to her address, I tried not to stare at the sleek contemporary architecture. It was a different world from my small ranch house near the garage. I expected her to say goodnight once I parked, but Elena made no move to leave. Instead, she turned to me with those attentive eyes. How long do you think the restoration work will take? I outlined the timeline, explaining the parts I'd need to order and the labor involved, then quoted her a price that was fair, but not cheap. She nodded thoughtfully, then surprised me with her next words. Would you like to come in for coffee? When I hesitated, she added, It's the least I can do after you came out so late to help me. Besides, she glanced at her watch, it's barely 11, and I'd love to hear more about those weekend restoration projects. The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility. The responsible part of me knew I should politely decline. I had early appointments tomorrow, and she was my best friend's aunt. But there was something in the way she asked, direct yet gentle, that made it hard to say no. I followed Elena into her home, immediately struck by how different it was from any house I'd ever known. Where my place was filled with inherited furniture and collected clutter, hers was all clean. Lines and careful intention. Modern art hung on white walls, and subtle lighting made everything feel warm despite the minimalism. Make yourself comfortable. She gestured to a sleek stool at her kitchen island. I hesitated, glancing down at my work boots and coveralls. She caught my concern and smiled. Don't worry about the floors. They've survived worse than a little. Garage? Dust. Even so, I found myself moving carefully as I settled onto the stool, watching as she moved through her kitchen with practiced grace. The coffee maker she used looked like something from a high-end cafe, all chrome and precise engineering. This might be the best coffee you've ever had, she said, measuring beans into a grinder. It's from a small roaster in Seattle that my sister discovered. The rich aroma filled the kitchen as she worked, and I found myself relaxing despite the unfamiliar surroundings. I didn't expect you to make fresh coffee this late. Some things shouldn't be rushed, she replied, carefully, pouring hot water in circular motions over the grounds. Even at 2 in the morning, when she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed briefly. Neither of us acknowledged it, but I felt the contact like a small electric current. The coffee was indeed exceptional, complex and smooth in a way that made my usual gas station brew seem like dirty water. So she leaned against the counter opposite me, cradling her own cup. Marcus tells me you're into classical music? I nearly choked on my coffee. He mentioned that? He was surprised to hear it playing in your garage one day. Said it seemed out of character. It helps me think, I admitted, especially during restorations. Something about batching an engine. Work just ... fits. Her eyes lit up. Batch? Have you been to the symphony here? They did the Brandenburg concertos last season. What I expected to be a quick courtesy coffee turned into hours of conversation. Elena told me about her recent passion for photography, showing me black and white shots she'd taken around the city. I found myself sharing book recommendations. Surprised to find we'd both recently read the same historical novel. When she passed me a coffee refill, our fingers touched again. This time, the contact lingered for just a fraction longer than necessary. I tried to keep my voice steady as I thanked her. I should mention, she said, settling back against the counter, I'm heading to Milan for work in a few days. 2 weeks of meetings and client presentations. She paused, then added, actually, that might work out well for the Mercedes. How so? I have been meaning to ask, would you consider doing more than just the immediate repairs? She set her cup down, looking at me directly. She probably needs a full restoration at this point. I've been putting it off, but ... She trailed off, then met my eyes with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I trust you with her. Something in the way she said those words felt weighted with meaning beyond the car. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain professional composure. As I outlined what a full restoration would involve, the time, the parts needed, the process. But my mind kept circling back to how she was looking at me, how the late hour and quiet kitchen made everything feel more intimate than it should. When I finally checked my phone, I was shocked to see it was past 2 in the morning. I should go, I said reluctantly. Early appointments tomorrow. Elena walked me to the door. Just before I stepped out, she touched my arm lightly. Thank you again for coming out tonight. Not everyone would have. The gentle pressure of her fingers lingered. Even after I'd climbed into my truck, as I drove home through the empty streets, I found myself replaying every moment of the evening, the brush touches, the shared laughter, the way conversation had flowed so easily between us. Something had shifted tonight, something significant, and possibly dangerous. I couldn't name it exactly, but I could feel it humming under my skin like an engine coming to life. I was cleaning up after a messy brake job when Jimmy stuck his head in the office doorway. Hey boss, you got a visitor. And she's carrying what looks like real coffee. My heart did a stupid little jump. I'd spent 2 weeks trying not to think about Elena, focusing instead on the steady progress of her Mercedes restoration. But in quiet moments, my mind would drift back to that late-night conversation in her kitchen. When I walked into our dim break room, she was standing by the window, Italian sunlight still clinging to her skin. She'd traded her business suit for casual wear, dark jeans and a cream sweater that somehow made our oil-stained space look shabby. I'd brought provisions, she smiled, holding up a carrier with 2 cups. I figured after 2 weeks of break room instant, you deserved better. The coffee was indeed worlds away from our usual fare, rich and complex with hints of chocolate. I tried not to watch as she took her first sip, but my eyes caught the slight flutter of pleasure that crossed her face. How was Milan? I asked, aiming for casual conversation. Beautiful? Chaotic? She leaned against the break room table. I spent my free time visiting these incredible restoration workshops. The craftsmanship there, ... I took photos. Would you like to see? She pulled out her phone, and suddenly we were standing close together, shoulders touching as she swiped through images of vintage Ferraris and Maseratis. Her perfume mixed with the coffee scent, making it hard to focus on the pictures. The attention to detail is amazing, she said, zooming in on a hand-tooled leather seat. It made me even more curious about what you're doing with my Mercedes. I led her to where her car sat in the restoration bay, parts carefully organized on nearby tables. As I explained each step of the process, she asked surprisingly technical questions. She'd clearly been researching, learning the terminology, wanting to understand more than just the surface details. The original wiring was a mess. I showed her the carefully labeled bundles, but we're keeping any salvageable parts, maintaining authenticity while improving function, like preserving history while acknowledging the need for growth. She mused, running her finger along a restored chrome strip. The gesture was almost tender. I noticed Mike and Jimmy exchanging looks across the garage. They'd been making subtle comments all week. Nothing crude, just knowing glances whenever Elena's name came up. I'd gotten good at deflecting, keeping things strictly professional. But professional felt increasingly difficult with Elena showing up every few days. Always. During lunch, always with coffee that made our break room smell like an upscale cafe. She'd sit on the workbench, asking questions about engineering and design while I tried to focus on carburetors instead of how the light caught her hair. "I've been thinking," she said during one of these visits, setting down her cup. "I'd love to learn more about the actual restoration process. Not just watching, but doing. I should have made an excuse. Should have explained about liability issues or insurance concerns. Instead, I heard myself saying, I could teach you the basics, if you're really interested. I am. Her eyes met mine, held for a moment too long. Very interested. The garage is closed Saturdays, I said, knowing I was stepping onto dangerous ground. We could start then. No distractions. Perfect. She smiled, and we both pretended this was purely about automotive education. This Saturday? 10 o'clock. I nodded, already imagining her in my space, learning to use tools, working close beside me. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. After she left, Jimmy raised an eyebrow at me. Private restoration lessons, huh? She wants to learn about her car, I said firmly, picking up a wrench. That's all. But as I watched her walk to her temporary vehicle, a sensible rental sedan, I knew that wasn't all. This attraction had grown from a spark to a steady flame, becoming harder to ignore with each coffee-scented visit. Saturday's lesson would bring us into closer orbit, and part of me knew we were both using the car as an excuse for something. Neither of us was ready to name. I turned back to the Mercedes, trying to focus on spark plugs and timing belts instead of the way Elena's fingers had traced that chrome, or how Saturday suddenly felt very far away. Saturday morning arrived with a metallic chill in the air, the kind that made the garage feel more like a freezer than a workspace. I'd been up since 6, organizing tools and trying not to think about how this day might change things. Elena pulled up at exactly 10 o'clock in a car that cost more than my annual income, but she stepped out looking ready to work in what I recognized as designer jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "I know what you're thinking," she said, catching my glance at her outfit. "But I promise these are dedicated work clothes now. I won't cry over a little grease." The garage felt smaller with her in it, even though she took up barely any space. I led her to where the Mercedes waited, its body partially stripped, showing the stories written in its metal skin. "First lesson," I said, handing her a piece of fine-grit sandpaper, identifying rust spots. "You need to feel them as much as see them." I guided her hand along the surface, trying to ignore how warm her skin felt against mine. "Feel that rough patch? That's where we start." She was a natural, moving with precise attention to detail that shouldn't have surprised me given her profession. When she broke a nail working on a stubborn spot, she just laughed and kept going, completely absorbed in the task. I haven't done anything this physical since my pottery phase in college, she admitted, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. It's oddly satisfying. We fell into an easy rhythm, me demonstrating techniques, her following with careful determination. The conversation flowed between technical instructions and deeper waters, like how she'd found herself after her divorce 3 years ago. He wasn't a bad person, she said, focused on a particular rust spot. We just stopped growing in the same direction. Sometimes I think that's worse than if he'd done something terrible. There's no one to blame. Just two people who lost their way. I understood more than I wanted to about losing people without drama or tragedy. My dad's death was like that, I found myself saying. Quick, clean, massive heart attack. No time for goodbyes or dramatic revelations. Just ... Gone. Leaving me a 22-year-old with a garage and no idea how to run it. The morning slipped away as we worked and talked. Elena shared her abandoned dreams of being a photographer, while I admitted I'd once wanted to design cars, not just fix them. The garage grew warmer with our movement, but I could still see her breath in the air when she laughed. She was working on a difficult section near the roof. When it happened, a splash of paint caught her hair, a pale streak against the dark strands. Without thinking, I reached up to point it out, my hand freezing inches from her face as I realized how close we were standing. The air between us crackled with something that had nothing to do with the cold. Elena's breath came in visible puffs, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart stutter. Neither of us moved, not closer, not away, caught in a moment that felt both endless and far too brief. We probably shouldn't complicate things, she finally said, her voice soft and not entirely convincing. Marcus would have opinions. You're right, I agreed, even as everything inside me argued against those words. This is about the car. We stepped apart carefully, returning to our tasks with deliberate focus. But now every accidental brush of hands passing tools, every shared glance checking progress, carried the weight of what we'd almost acknowledged. The garage felt charged with possibility and warning in equal measure. The rest of the morning passed in careful choreography, close enough to work, far enough to maintain the illusion that this was just about automotive restoration. But we both knew something had shifted, like a gear finally catching after too long out of alignment. The morning had grown warmer, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every movement felt charged with meaning as we worked side by side on the Mercedes. The earlier moment still hanging between us like static before a storm. Elena had switched to working on the roof panel, stretching up on her toes to reach a stubborn spot. Without thinking, pure mechanics instinct, I stepped behind her, hands steadying her waist when she wobbled slightly. The touch was automatic, professional even, until it wasn't. She stilled under my hands, the sandpaper falling silent. I could feel her breath catch, matching my own suddenly racing pulse. Slowly, she turned within the circle of my grip, looking up at me with eyes that held equal parts wanting and worry. The kiss happened like that. No dramatic move, no grand gesture. Just the smallest lean forward from both of us, meeting in the middle as if drawn by gravity. Her lips were soft, hesitant, tasting faintly of the coffee we'd shared earlier. My hands tightened slightly at her waist, and hers came to rest against my chest. Not pushing away, but creating a pause, a moment to breathe and think. We broke apart gently, but she didn't step back. Her hand remained on my chest, warm through my work shirt, as she looked up at me with a complicated expression. We need to talk about this, she said quietly, her usual confidence wavering slightly. There are ... complications. I know. My voice sounded rough to my own ears. The age difference, for one. She started counting off on her fingers, her other hand still resting over my heartbeat. 19 years isn't nothing. And Marcus, he's your friend, my nephew. What would this do to him? She took a steadying breath. Then there's the professional aspect. Your reputation in the community, my position at work. People talk. They judge. I listened, knowing she was right about every point. The rational? Part of my brain had been making these same arguments for weeks. But having her this close made rationality feel far less important than it probably should. I haven't been able to think about anything else, I admitted, the words coming out before I could filter them. For weeks now, every time you visit, every coffee, every conversation, I know all the reasons this is complicated. I've listed them to myself 100 times. Her expression softened. I feel more alive than I have in years, she whispered almost to herself. When I'm here, working on the car, talking with you, everything feels possible again. She finally stepped back, creating space between us. But feeling alive isn't always enough reason to risk everything. Is it? The garage suddenly felt colder without her close. I ran and threw my hair, probably, leaving grease streaks I'd regret later. No, I said honestly, maybe not. But sometimes it's enough reason to at least consider the risk. Elena gathered her purse from the workbench, movements precise but not hurried. I need time, she said finally, to think about this. To be sure we're not both just caught up in something that feels good in the moment, but could hurt a lot of people, including ourselves. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak as she took the keys to the loaner car I'd arranged for her. At the garage door, she paused, looking back at the Mercedes and then at me. I don't regret it, she said softly. The kiss, whatever I decide, I want you to know that. Then she was gone, the purr of the loaner car's engine fading into the Saturday quiet. I spent the rest of the day under the Mercedes trying to lose myself in the familiar work of restoration. But every tool I picked up reminded me of teaching her proper techniques. Every inch of the car held memories of her questions and laughter. The garage felt hollow without her presence, too big and too small all at once. I replayed every word of our conversation, wondering if I'd ruined everything by not being stronger, by letting that one moment of weakness crack our careful boundaries. Or maybe a persistent voice whispered in my mind I'd finally started something real, something worth all the complications she'd listed. The Mercedes above me remained silent, offering no answers, just the honest evidence of age. And time and history written in its metal bones. 3 days can feel like forever when you're waiting for something. I found myself checking my phone constantly, each notification bringing a spike of hope followed by disappointment. The garage kept me busy. There was always work to be done, but even that felt different now. I finished Elena's Mercedes restoration ahead of schedule, probably because I couldn't stop working on it. The burgundy paint gleamed under the shop lights, every chrome detail polished to mirror brightness. It was some of my best work, but showing it off to an empty garage felt hollow. She should have been here to see each step, asking questions, sharing that smile that made everything else fade away. Marcus called Tuesday about meeting up for beers that weekend. My stomach twisted as I made up an excuse about being behind on work. The lie tasted bitter. I'd never been dishonest with him before. How do you tell your friend you kissed his aunt? That you can't stop thinking about her? The guilt sat heavy in my chest long after I hung up. I was just closing up Wednesday evening, double-checking the locks like I always do, when headlights swept across the garage door. My heart jumped before I could tell it not to. This time, it wasn't just another passing car. Elena stepped out holding 2 bags of takeout. The logo from that Lebanese place we talked about weeks ago, clearly visible. She looked different somehow. More certain, the hesitation from Saturday gone from her stance. I brought dinner, she said simply. And I'd made my decision. Can we talk? I nodded, probably too quickly, and reopened the side door. The garage was warm from the day's work, smelling of metal and grease and honest labor. Elena didn't seem to mind. She set the food down on my workbench and started unpacking containers. I thought we could make it a picnic, she said, gesturing to the clean shop floor near the Mercedes. Unless that's too informal for such a serious conversation. The hint of teasing in her voice eased some of the tension in my shoulders. We settled on the concrete, using shop towels as makeshift placemats. The situation should have felt ridiculous. A professional woman in business attire sitting cross-legged on a garage floor, sharing hummus and tabbouleh with a mechanic. Instead, it felt perfectly natural, like we'd done this 100 times. Before, I've spent the last 3 days thinking about every possible angle, Elena began, breaking off a piece of pita bread. I even talked to my therapist about it yesterday. That surprised me. You have a therapist? Started seeing her during my divorce, she explained. Best decision I ever made. She helps me see things clearly when my mind gets too tangled. She took a careful breath, like now. I waited, my own food untouched, as she continued. I made a list of every concern. The age difference, 19 years, is significant. The social complications. You're my nephew's friend. We move in different circles. Professional considerations. How this could affect both our reputations. She met my eyes steadily. I analyzed each one thoroughly, considering worst-case scenarios and potential consequences. Sounds very organized, I said softly, recognizing her need to approach this systematically. I'm good at organized, she smiled. What I'm not good at is ignoring how I feel when I'm here. How everything seems more vibrant, more possible. She gestured around the garage. Even this place, it should feel foreign to me, but instead it feels like somewhere I belong. My throat felt tight. I've been doing my own analyzing, I admitted, trying to find all the reasons this is a bad idea. But I keep coming back to how right it feels when you're here. How the age difference disappears when we're talking. How none of the complications seem to matter compared to what's developing between us. Elena set down her fork, her expression serious but soft. I'm tired, she said quietly. Tired of living carefully. Tired of making the safe choice because it's expected. After my divorce, I promised myself I'd stop letting fear of judgment dictate my life. She reached across the space between us, her hand finding mine. This scares me. But for the first time in years, it's the kind of fear that feels like anticipation instead of warning. I could feel my pulse in every finger where her hand touched mine. What does that mean for us? The question hung in the warm garage air, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the gleaming Mercedes that had brought us together. Elena's hand tightened slightly on mine as she prepared to answer ... Elena single quotes. His fingers were still intertwined with mine as she looked up. Softening from analytical to something more vulnerable. I've spent so many years being the responsible one, she said quietly. The dependable aunt, a steady professional, always making the safe choice. Even my marriage was more about stability than passion. She traced a pattern on my palm, sending shivers up my arm. I thought that part of me, the part that could feel this alive, was gone. What changed? I asked, though I think I knew the answer. You, she said simply. That night on the highway, watching you work on my car, the way you talked about engines like they were living things. It woke something up in me. Something I'd buried under years of practical decisions. The garage felt smaller suddenly, more intimate, despite the high ceilings and concrete walls. Our impromptu picnic spread lay forgotten between us as she continued. When you teach me about restoration work, your whole face lights up. You see beauty in these broken things, potential where others see junk, and somehow ... She paused, gathering her thoughts. Somehow you look at me the same way. My heart thundered in my chest. You make me want to be more, I admitted. More than just the guy who inherited his dad's garage. When you ask questions about my work, when you actually listen to the answers, you make me remember all the dreams I used to have before responsibility took over. Tell me about those dreams, she whispered. Expanding the restoration business. Taking on apprentices. Maybe even opening a classic car showroom someday? I shook my head, amazed at how easily these long-buried aspirations surfaced under her gentle attention. You see possibility in me that I'd forgotten was there. Elena shifted closer, her knee brushing mine. I see you, she said softly. Not just who you are now, but who you could be. Who you want to be. This time, when I leaned in to kiss her, there was no hesitation, no surprise. She met me halfway, whispering yes against my lips before her hands found my shoulders, pulling me closer. The kiss was different from our first, deliberate, certain, full of shared understanding about what we were choosing, and what it might cost us ... when we finally broke apart. Elena laughed quietly, the sound echoing off the garage walls. I feel like a teenager, she admitted, touching her lips. My heart's racing. Mine too, I smiled, standing and offering her my hand. We should probably clean up this feast before it attracts every stray cat in the neighborhood. We gathered the containers, our hands brushing deliberately now instead of accidentally. The casual touches felt electric, charged with new meaning. Elena bumped her hip against mine as we packed up the leftovers, and I caught her around the waist, making her laugh again. Your apartment's upstairs, isn't it? She asked, glancing toward the narrow staircase in the corner. The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. I nodded, suddenly nervous. It's nothing fancy, ... I'd like to see it, she said quietly. Squeezing my hand, if you want to show me. The stairs creaked familiarly as we climbed them, but everything else felt new. Elena's hand in mine, the sound of her heels on the wooden steps, the anticipation building with each floor we ascended. At my door, she paused, turning to face me. Are you sure about this? She asked, her eyes searching mine. About us? Once we crossed this line, I answered her with a kiss, pouring everything I felt into it. My certainty, my desire, my understanding of the complex path we were choosing. She melted into me, her hand sliding into my hair as she pressed closer. When we separated, her smile held no doubt. That's a very convincing answer, she murmured. Eyes shining, ... I woke to unfamiliar sounds in my kitchen. The gentle clink of metal, water running, cabinet doors opening and closing. For a moment, I lay there disoriented until memories of last night flooded back. Elena, the Lebanese takeout, our conversation, everything that followed. The morning light streamed through my bedroom window, catching dust motes in its beam. Through the open door, I caught the rich aroma of coffee being prepared, followed by a quiet humming, something classical that I couldn't quite place. Though I knew Elena would tell me if I asked. When I padded into the kitchen, I had to pause in the doorway, taking in the sight. Elena stood at my counter wearing my old engineering college t-shirt, the faded logo stretched across her shoulders. Her hair was slightly mussed, and she looked younger somehow, more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. She was focused intently on my copper says, the Turkish coffee pot she'd noticed weeks ago during one of our conversations about international coffee traditions. Good morning, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and the smile that spread across her face made my heart skip. I hope you don't mind, she gestured to the says. I'd been wanting to try this since I first saw it. Mind? I'm just impressed you remember how to use it properly. I moved closer, drawn into her orbit. I pay attention when people share their passions with me, she replied, reaching up to brush my messy hair back. The casual intimacy of the gesture felt both new and somehow familiar. The coffee's almost ready. Back to bed? Through the kitchen window, I could see her Mercedes in the early morning light, its burgundy paint gleaming after weeks of restoration work. It was finally ready for her to drive home. But neither of us mentioned it. Elena brought the coffee to my bedroom on a mismatched set of mugs I'd forgotten I owned. She settled beside me on the bed, tucking her legs underneath her with easy grace. We should probably talk about some things, she said, but her tone was warm, not worried. Marcus? I ventured, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared coffee. Among other things. She traced the rim of her mug thoughtfully. I think ... I think we need to tell him soon. Before he hears it from someone else, but maybe not everything at once. I nodded, understanding the delicacy required. How do you want to handle things publicly? I know your position at the firm. I was thinking about that, she said, reaching for my free hand. Her fingers intertwined with mine naturally, as if we'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Maybe we start quietly. Not hiding, exactly, but letting things unfold at their own pace. I'd like that, I agreed, setting my coffee aside so I could tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. My next business trip is in 3 weeks, she mentioned. Paris this time. It's shorter than the Milan trip. Just 4 days. I'll miss our lunch breaks, I admitted, still amazed at how easy it felt to say these things to her now. She caught me studying her face in the morning light. The way it softened her features made her look both vulnerable and completely at peace. A smile tugged at her lips. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, though her expression suggested she might already know. "How different you look in this light," I said, honestly. "Natural you seem here, in my space. Even wearing my ratty old college shirt." She glanced down at the shirt and laughed. "It's comfortable. Though I notice you're not complaining about me borrowing it." "Definitely not complaining," I murmured, and she smiled that new smile, the one that held secrets we now shared. "We should really test drive her," Alina said, nodding toward the Mercedes through the window. "Make sure everything's perfect before I take her home." I grabbed the keys from my workbench, enjoying how natural it felt when Alina slipped her hand into mine as we headed downstairs. The morning sun had warmed the garage, making the burgundy paint gleam even more beautifully. "You take the wheel first," she insisted, pressing the keys into my palm. "Show me how she's supposed to feel." The leather seats welcomed us as I adjusted. The mirrors, Elena's perfume mixed with the fresh leather conditioner I'd used, creating a scent I knew I'd always associate with this moment. The engine purred to life, smooth and strong. All those weeks of restoration work singing in perfect harmony as we cruised through quiet Sunday morning streets. Elena's hand found mine on the gear shift, her touch gentle but certain. I guided. U.S. toward the coastal road, my favorite test drive route where restored engines could really show their potential. The Mercedes handled the curves perfectly, responding to every subtle input. Elena laughed with pure joy when I opened up the engine on a straight stretch, the sound echoing off the cliffs. "You brought her back to life," she said, squeezing my hand. "Dad would have loved this." I pulled into the overlook parking area, where the ocean stretched endlessly before us. Elena slid into the driver's seat for the return trip, handling the car with natural confidence, while I watched her profile against the morning light, memorizing how the sun caught her hair, back. At the garage, she parked but kept the engine running, her hands still on the wheel. When she turned to me, I saw vulnerability in her eyes I hadn't expected. "Will you regret this?" she asked quietly. "When the novelty wears off?" I took her hand, running my thumb across her knuckles. "I remember how you take your coffee. 1. Sugar, no cream. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on engine parts. How your laugh sounds different when you're truly happy versus being polite. The exact shade of red your cheeks turn when you're working in the cold, ... I held their gaze. "This isn't novelty, Elena. This is choice." We stood beside the Mercedes, both of us hesitating between what was and what would be. Elena traced her fingers along the restored paint, her professional demeanor softened by the morning's intimacy. "About telling people," she said carefully, "I think we should take it slow publicly. Give ourselves time to figure this out privately first." "Makes sense," I agreed, watching how the sunlight caught her hair. "Marcus, your work, my customers. There's a lot to consider." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But I don't want to hide either. Just ... be strategic. Strategic." I pulled her close then, the fabric of her borrowed shirt soft under my hands. "Whatever pace you want to set, I'm certain about the direction we're heading." Her response was to kiss me right there in the open garage doorway, where any Sunday morning passerby could see. When she pulled back, I couldn't help grinning at her small act of rebellion. "Dinner at my place tonight?" she asked. "I'll cook this time. I'd like that." The role reversal felt right. Her kitchen this time, building something new together. She slid into the driver's seat, the Mercedes humming to life with the smooth purr of renewed purpose. At the garage entrance, she paused, looking back at me with an expression that matched everything I was feeling. Excitement tangled with uncertainty. Hope wrapped in complexity. I watched until the burgundy paint disappeared around the corner, then turned back to the garage that now held more than just tools and memories of my father. 3 weeks ago, this was just another repair job, a favor for a friend. Now, standing in the space where everything had shifted, I realized every careful routine I'd built was about to change. And for once, I welcomed the uncertainty tonight's dinner waited ahead, and with it, the next step into whatever we were becoming. Who would have thought a broken down Mercedes could lead to this? If tonight's words met you where you are, tap subscribe and pass it on to someone who might need the same pause. I'll meet you here tomorrow.